My name is George Rutherford. I was born in Charlestown, West Virginia, at 9 Hessey Street, the area that is called Dogtown. I was born in October the 21st, 1935. My father's name is John Rutherford. My mother's name was Lula Lee. My mother died when I was 2 years old. I never really knew who she was. Matter of fact, I never even saw her picture until I was about 80 years old. My father raised us, 3 boys. We were taken care of by our neighbors. At that time, the old saying is that the village raised a child. For that time, all the people in the neighborhood looked out for us while my father worked at the fertilizer plant in Ranson. At that time, there were very few places that black employees could work, and the fertilizer plant was one of them. And he would work there on the average of 10 hours a day, and sometime when he get off at 6 o'clock, he would go back and shovel coal off the coal cars at the old plant that was next door to it to get extra money. Also, where we lived at in Dogtown, there was a stock sale, a Blue Ridge stock sale. And we used to go up there and work, making sometime maybe 5 cents an hour or 10 cents an hour. But the biggest money maker when we was coming up as young kids was to go to the racetrack. All the kids in Dogtown, like James Taylor and Donald Taylor and the Smith boys, would go to the racetrack and we would take a rag and a bottle of water and wash people's windshield as they leave the races to come home. And they would usually give us a tip, maybe 5 or 10 cents. If we could make 50 cents a day, that was big money because at that time, 50 cents an hour was big money to be made. I can recall very well going to school, Dogtown. We used to go to school at Eagle Avenue, which is up on the Potato Hill, Charlestown, which is about a mile and a half to 2 mile walk. And we had to walk it every day. We lived the furthest out from the school because we were at Hessey Street. So we'd go down the street, down North Street, and pick up the Taylors and the rest of them, and we would all walk together. We had to walk together for safety. We had to go on the back street because it wasn't safe to walk the main street because lots of the white kids would more or less pick a fight with us. And also, we walked on the main street. We had to step out in the street when white people come along. And this was in the around 1940. This was taking place. So we went the back way to school, which was the old Eagle Avenue. Um, we would walk because there was no bus, regardless of the weather. Snow, rain, regardless, we still had to go. And they didn't cancel school. Matter of fact, no one really had a telephone. And so we didn't know whether or not school was canceled or not. So we would walk to the school, and at that time, we get to school, uh, they would have heat in there, maybe a coal stove running to keep the place warm. What's the amazing thing about the school we went to, there was a bathroom. Uh, and in the bathroom, there was two stools for the kids and the teachers. They used the same one. And also the urinals, just one. So the teachers had no privacy, either the men teacher or the female teacher. I can recall very well around 1942 and 1943, when I was in about the third or fourth grade, the principal at that time, which was Mr. Stewart, would ask me and a couple other boys to get a basket, get a wagon, and to take it downtown on Charles Street to pick up food. So we would leave in the morning about 10 o'clock, go down, pick up this food, bring it back, and the teacher or cook would cook the food, and this is what we had for our lunch. Um, Later on, the high school was added to the Eagle Avenue School. And the veterans that came back from World War II this was in 1946, 47, they came in and they more or less took care of us. We more or less followed them. They were more or less like role models. I can recall very well Mr. E.M. Danridge started a football team. Now, Paige Jackson had her old field out there, a real old field, was really rough and everything. We played baseball and basketball and everything. Well, Mr. Danridge started a football team. He got lots of hand-me-down football equipment from other places. And right on the side of the football field was a sewer, the sewage field. And the sewer was always running over. But we had to play football in the sewer. Uh, and lots of times people just fell in the sewer. That was just part of the game, and we expected. But on top of that, there was no shower, no place to take a shower. So once you get all messed up, all you can do is go and get dressed and go on home. And I guess the bad part about it is very few people, I'd say about 5% of the black students there had running water in the home. We still all had water outside. Because I can recall very well taking baths outdoors in the tub when I was a kid, letting the sun heat the water up. But back to the school, we really enjoyed school because the teachers really pushed us. They made us learn, and those reasons why we had to learn. If it wasn't for the teachers, we wouldn't be where we are today. Not only did they teach us about A, B, C's, and 1, 2, 3, they also taught us about the Bible. Matter of fact, I learned more about the Bible from Miss Annie Watkins than anyone else at all, because she made us have a new Bible verse every week, and each student had to come in and repeat the Bible verse. And she also taught us different religious songs. But on top of that, these very same teachers, not only did you see them on school days, but on Sunday mornings in Sunday school and in church, they are right there also. And we could never do anything wrong because these teachers would let our parents know. And so it was, they really had us locked in. One of the best teachers I can recall right offhand was Mrs. Johnson. She really took an interest in us and made us really learn English. She was diagram words and everything. But also they taught us how to live. For example, Mr. King, he graduated from Stewart College. And I'll never forget, one day I was walking in the class. I was in about the 10th grade at that time, and I thought I was dressed pretty good. I had these old shoes on, and they were dirty. He pulled me aside and said, "Boy, I want you to get those shoes shined and come in here with them clean." And it never crossed my mind. Not only that, but he even gave me some money to get the polish to polish my shoes. And after that, I always learned to keep a clean shoes. He also taught us how to wear ties. Maybe average about maybe once a month we had dress-up days. And regardless what you had on, what type of shirt, you put a tie on. They taught us how to wear ties and everything. But not only that, the female teacher also taught the students how to dress and how to get along. Mostly I can recall that they would tell us about how to respect each other, especially men had to respect the girls, and so forth. Very, very seldom heard any type of profanity take place. So gradually, I guess the biggest thing I can recall about school is that the teachers really pushed us more than anything else. And then the schools separated. The K. Jackson High School was built, and high school students went to the new school down on Warrington Avenue. And I guess the disadvantage to that is the fact that the younger kids did not get a chance to be around the older students to really be a role model for them. I can also recall very well those days when we had books. The books were usually shaggy that came from the white school, and they were, backs was off for some of them, the writing in them. They were horrible, but we still use it and we still learn. Mr. Danridge, who was the biology teacher at that time, science teacher, he was teaching science and he had a lab, and he was trying to do different projects where you need a Bunsen burner, and he would more or less tell us what should take place because there was no gas and he couldn't use no Bunsen burners. but he more or less demonstrated to us what the results should have been. So those are the type of conditions we came to when we went to school. But however, every student that graduated from high school, every student I can recall 2 or 3 years out in high school, had the opportunity to go to college somewhere. Lots of them didn't go. But out of my class of 21, I believe I was 16 of them went to college. Some of them went into service. But all of them had the opportunity to go to college because of people like Mr. Flemings, Mr. King, Miss Johnson. They had connections with lots of these black colleges, and they would contact these black colleges and say, look, we got some students that want to go. We didn't have to worry about no ACT or SAT. All you have to do is just have to be willing to want to go. And there wasn't no such thing as a football scholarship or basketball scholarship. It's just the fact that you want to go to college and improve yourself. And I guess I can still remember today that teachers tell me that, you can be anything you want to be, but you got to work for it. You got to work for it, you can do it. The NAACP in Jefferson County, the second phase, really started in 1964, and I was not involved. At that time, I was in Marshall University going to school. I did not come back to Charlestown until 1969. At that time, NAACP was born, but in my opinion, it was just too mild. You wasn't getting anything done. I was more or less interested in stuff like what Smokey Carmichael and Reb Brown was doing. I was used to protesting and marching down in the southern part of the state. However, in 1970, Harvard got appointed one day and asked me to come to NAACP meeting. He was the president. And, I was sort of hesitant because I knew I didn't have time for that. I must really get a black panther started up here. But he persuaded me, so I went to this meeting. And I was surprised that the number of people there, majority of them were female. Well, we worked on a couple of projects. I kept project hesitant. And then finally I began to like it. But I realized one thing from working with NAACP at that time, this was around 1970 and 1971, that we got more accomplished just by working and dealing than I did when I was doing all the marching and so forth. Because all the marching we did, we got very little accomplished. But just from going to the police or school board, we got lots of things accomplished. Well, Harvard had to leave in 1973, I think, to go to work. Had him move. And Russell Stevenson from Jefferson took over as the president. And I was just a member. Well, Mr. Russell Stevenson passed away after about maybe a couple of months. And there was still one for president. I figured that was the end of the branch. So we go to the meeting, and I never forget the women, Miss Holly Corbett, Miss Genevieve Monroe, Bertha Fox, Dora Washington, Miss Sally Johnson. These ladies, they were like bulldogs. They told me that I was the president, and I told them that I was not the president. I didn't want the president. And they more or less said, you got no choice, you are the president now, so take over. They've been business. And I guess when I say they've been business, I can recall very well a year before when something was going on in town, and Harvard told me to go with him up to Mr. Danridge's house, that it was a meeting, and he wanted me to go along with him. Well, see, Alvin had a thing when things get hot to carry me along with him. So we went to Mr. Danridge's house. Here Mr. Danridge was with these ladies. Mr. Danridge, the only man now, with these 4 or 5 ladies. And they chewed him out. They chewed Harvard out because he was not moving fast enough on some projects. They weren't fast action. And they wanted him to know that you don't run the branch. We run the branch. That you are just a servant. Something I never forget these ladies taught us. That just because you're the president, you don't run the branch. You report to the executive committee, and they run the branch. They tell you what to do. And also, they want action fast. Don't wait around and do this and do that. Go ahead and take action, and because they hold you accountable for it. And that was one of the most important things I learned. But these women were the backbone of the branch. I can recall very well these same women would always go to the state convention and the uh, the quarterly convention in the state. And one time there was a march being held down in Charleston. I can recall Mr. Dolly Talbert, Mr. Monroe, and all of them had their hats on and had the banners and walking down the streets in Charleston protesting. And this was back in the 70s now. And you just couldn't stop these ladies. So they were really the backbone. And as a result of that, after they made me the president, or forced me to be the president, they expect me to produce. And at the same time, whenever I was attacked, they would protect me 100%. I'll never forget one time when Jim Drove went to the paper asked NAACP to remove me as president. I shouldn't be president. I complained on the town on some issues. Well, these ladies went to the town council and told the mayor and the city council that they want Jim Grove to keep his mouth off Rutherford and NAACP, that they don't, that they don't want to make the decision, not him. The recommendation. So they were real strong, really, really supportive. And that's the way it is today. Right now, the NAACP, it is an executive committee that really call the shots. I think that the Jefferson County branch is fortunate because of what these ladies set down years ago. A couple of years ago, I began to try to do some genealogy of my family. But I knew from my father that we were from Charlestown. But later on, I found out that things were not quite the way they said it was. My father's name was John Rutherford. His father's name was George Rutherford, who was my grandfather. And George Rutherford's father was John Rutherford, who was my great-grandfather. And John Rutherford's father was Louis Rutherford, who was my great-great-grandfather. And he is the one that was the slave, full-time slave, owned by a slave owner up in Martinsburg by the name of Dr. Cole. My great-grandfather, John Rutherford, was born in 1854, and he was 9 years old when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. His father, Louis Rutherford, was a slave for much longer, I guess much as 40 years more years than that. During those days, there was a lot of families that had lots of kids. Like most families had at least 6 and 7 kids. But one thing amazing about the Rutherford family, it seemed like there always a John and always a George in every generation. At one time in Charlestown, there was 4 different George Rutherfords, all in the same family. It seemed like those names always lingered. George Rutherford, John Rutherford, and always Ann somewhere along the line. After my great-grandfather John Rutherford was more or less freed, they went into business because they found out that lots of black people, once they were free, had to find something to do because they were not working on plantation. And my grandfather did farming, but he never owned a farm to the best of my knowledge. But however, he did work like he was a town crier. And he also took care of horses and did other type of little minor farm work. So amazing thing, I understand that my grandmother, her name was Daly, but she came from Shepherdstown. And I'm not sure exactly what kind of work she did, but I understand it's possibly more or less like housework, because I understand that during the days of slavery, in this area, very few white women knew anything about taking care of homes. And so therefore, once the slaves were free, they had to have someone take care of homes. So the women wound up working in the homes as more or less housekeepers. So I believe Ada Staley is her name, wound up taking care of homes. And she was my grandmother, my father's mother. Like I said, my father, he was a worker also. He started working in around 1913, and he worked in the fertilizer, and that was real hard work. As a matter of fact, most of the black men during those days had to do a lot of extra hard work. I had an uncle also named Lou Rutherford. He also worked in the barns and livery stations taking care of animals. It appeared that most of the men, the Rutherford family, had some kind of connection working with horses. Even my brother John, who lived to be 28 years old, he also worked with horses at the racetrack. It seemed like this must have been something they learned years ago, my family, to deal with horses. For. But myself, I never really cared too much for dealing with horses, and as of now, I still had never been on a horseback. Um, so my family done this type of work. Mostly has been hard labor work. None of them have ever thought about going to college until in the 50s. College was out of the question until maybe Page Jackson School came on and we began to think about college at that time.